The discovery of the tomb of Prophet Zulki on the Great Wall of China, the conversion of thousands, tells the story of an archaeological discovery that shook the world when a tomb believed to belong to Prophet Zulki was discovered near the Great Wall of China. The story explores how this discovery affected Chinese society and the wider Islamic world. Thousands of people, including many who were initially skeptical, became interested in learning more about Islam after learning about the story of Prophet Zulki, who is revered in Islamic tradition. The tomb became a focal point for interfaith debate while also sparking a new interest in Islamic history in China. This synopsis will describe the spiritual and cultural impact of this discovery and how it affected the beliefs and lives of the thousands of people who were inspired by the story of Prophet Zulki. The mystery behind the ancient stone. The autumn sky hung gray over the mountains of Gansu, China. A thin mist danced between the ancient stone walls of the Great Wall, giving it a deep sense of mystery. In a section of the wall rarely visited by tourists, a team of archaeologists was carefully digging. This was no ordinary team, they had been sent by the National Historical Research Institute to study an ancient fortress that had just been discovered through satellite imagery. The leader of the team was Dr. Lu Wei, a senior archaeologist known for his tenacity and skepticism. With his face covered in dust and eyes fueled by fatigue, he had no idea that this day would be the biggest turning point in his life. "Mr. Lu, we found something," shouted a young assistant, pointing into the excavation. Dr. Lu immediately climbed down carefully. At the bottom of the excavation, the top of a large stone was exposed that did not appear to be from a local culture. The stone was rectangular in shape, like an ancient chest, with intricate carvings on its sides. "What is this?" he murmured. The carvings on the stone did not look like Chinese characters, they were circular, slightly angular, and unfamiliar. But on one side, it was written in what appeared to be Arabic, Davakul Zulk. Dr. Lu was stunned. "Is this Arabic?" he whispered softly in disbelief. He immediately contacted a professor of Middle Eastern languages from Beijing University, Professor Hassan Kasimai, who happened to be in the neighboring province for a conference on the history of Asian civilizations. A few days later, Professor Hassan stood in front of the stone, staring with a pale but awe-filled face. "Dr. Lu," he said softly, "this is not just a coffin. This is a tombstone." "Tombstone? Who is buried here?" Professor Hassan took a deep breath. "Zulkifli. In Islam, he is a prophet. This could change history." Dr. Lu laughed nervously, trying to deny it. "But it is impossible for a prophet from a foreign holy book to be buried here on Chinese soil. This is too incredible to believe." "It is precisely because it is so extraordinary that we should not ignore it," Professor Hassan replied firmly. News of the discovery spread quickly, initially only among academics, but it soon became national news. The media called it the religious discovery of the century. People began to arrive, many of whom were moved, cried, and even prayed around the site. However, behind all the joy and curiosity, there were whispers of fear. Was the world ready to accept the fact that a prophet mentioned in the Quran had once set foot on Chinese soil, and perhaps even been buried there? Dr. Lu had no idea that the tombstone would not only open a door to the past but also a gateway to major changes that would shake the beliefs and history of this country. Traces of a forgotten prophet. The National Archives office in Beijing is filled with tension. Researchers from various fields, archaeology, theology, ancient history, and even linguistics, have gathered to investigate a previously unthinkable possibility, that a prophet in the Islamic, Jewish, and Christian traditions may have lived or died in China. One of the key figures in the research is Professor Hassan Kasimi, a Middle Eastern historian who has dedicated his life to studying the intersections between Islamic history and East Asian civilization. He stands in front of a presentation board displaying an ancient map of the Silk Road. Zulkifli, or Ezekiel in Hebrew, is a prophet mentioned in the Quran and the Old Testament. In Islam, he is known as a patient figure, and according to some stories, he was sent to a stubborn people, explained Professor Hassan in front of a closed scientific forum. He continued, there is an interesting theory which states that after delivering his message in the Sham region, Zulkifli traveled eastward, perhaps because he was expelled or at the behest of Allah, and finally settled in an area that was still part of Central Asia. And you believe the territory is now China? Asked one of the participants. I'm not concluding. I'm just presenting data. But if the tombstones found are genuine, and if the writing and carving style can be proven to be from ancient times, then it's not a coincidence. Research after research was carried out. The ancient writing on the tomb apparently matches the form of Arabic calligraphy from the 6th to 7th centuries AD, although it is more primitive. Carbon tests on the remains of organic material around the chest showed it to be more than 1,300 years old. And what is most surprising, there is a crescent moon symbol and a sign that resembles the word Allah carved faintly on the inside of the stone. Meanwhile, in the village where the grave is located, residents began to tell stories about local legends which they had previously considered just fairy tales. One of them came from an old man named Zhang Yu, who said he often heard stories from his great-grandfather about a holy man from the West who came bringing a message of peace and died there. In the past, he said, the man was never angry. He taught us not to worship statues but to worship one God. But after he died, the leaders of that time banned his teachings, Zhang Yu said in an interview. The story was further strengthened by the discovery of an ancient text in the local language, which spoke of a teacher from heaven, who wore a long robe, fasted during the day, and prostrated at night. This could be Zulki, said Professor Hassan quietly, full of emotion. This discovery began to attract international attention. Scholars from various countries, including the Middle East and Southeast Asia, came to conduct further research. Some even held prayers and recited supplications near the tomb because they believed that the place contained blessings. However, not everyone was happy. Some secular figures and government authorities began to worry that such great attention to the site could trigger an uncontrolled religious revival. Moreover, the number of visitors who come every day now reaches thousands, many of whom previously did not know Islam at all. Behind all the controversy and doubt, one thing is clear, the story of the Prophet Zulki, who had long disappeared, is now alive again and igniting the fire of spiritual search in the hearts of many. Hearts tremble in the land of the bamboo curtain. Winter has begun to bite the mountains of Gansu, but the cold weather has not deterred the thousands of people who come every day to the site of the Prophet Zulki's tomb. They come from all over the country, farmers from remote villages, students from big cities, even retirees who are curious about the big news that has shocked the internet. One of them is Lim, a student majoring in philosophy at Tsinghua University, Beijing. Since childhood, she has been taught to think rationally and scientifically. However, since reading an article about the discovery of the tomb and the story of a figure named Zulk, her heart has begun to be disturbed. I don't know why, but there is something different about this story, she said to her friend. It's as if I am called to find something that has been missing in my life. Upon arriving at the location, Li Mei witnessed something that made her heart beat fast. In front of the tomb, an old man stood reciting verses in Arabic in a calm and touching voice. The people around her reflected deeply, many shed tears, although not all of them understood the meaning of the reading. Li Mei couldn't hold back her tears. She didn't understand what she was reading, but for some reason her heart felt very calm. It was as if the verses were sweeping away all the remnants that she had hidden behind logic. On the other side of town, Wang Zhan, a successful businessman who was in the midst of a life crisis, heard about this discovery from the news. He initially thought it was all just a media sensation, but his curiosity overcame his skepticism. I have everything, money, a big house, connections, but I feel empty. Maybe I should go there, even if only to prove that all this is just a coincidence, he said to himself. But when he arrived at the location, Wang experienced something far beyond his expectations. He was greeted by Muslim volunteers who helped him understand who Prophet Zulkifli was. They showed him the stories of the prophets in Islam, how they were chosen people who invited others to monotheism, patience, and justice. One of the volunteers, a young man named Abdullahu, distributed a copy of the Quran in Mandarin translation. Wang Jan took the copy home. That night, he opened the page that Abdullah had bookmarked. The verse read, "And remember the story of Ismail, Idris, and Dulkal, they are all patient people." Surah Sad 38:48. Suddenly, his heart trembled. He remembered a life full of ambition but empty of patience and meaning. The next day, Wang Jan returned to the tomb. He stood at a distance, then lowered his head in silence. In his chest, there was a strong urge to start a new life. Within 2 months, the number of people coming to the tomb had exceeded 100,000. Some of them, after studying the Islamic teachings that were distributed by volunteers around the site, decided to recite the 2 sentences of the Shahada. This phenomenon shocked local and international media. Several television stations began broadcasting inspirational stories about school teachers who converted to Islam after reading the story of the Prophet Zulk, about atheist youth who finally bowed down at the grave, and about families who began to study Islam secretly in their homes, out of fear but also an inexplicable sense of emotion. No coercion, no propaganda, just the honesty of a story of a prophet that had been hidden in the pages of history but now greeted thousands of people behind the old walls of the bamboo curtain country. Turmoil and pressure emerged when truth disturbed power. As the number of visitors to the tomb of Prophet Zulkifli increased and word of the wave of conversions to Islam spread by word of mouth, a sense of anxiety began to creep into the circles of power. The local government, which had initially welcomed the discovery as an opportunity for historical tourism, began to feel uneasy about the uncontrolled direction. Several civil intelligence reports showed a sharp increase in searches for the words Islam, Zulkifli, and Quran on local search engines. Not only that, new communities emerged, forming closed discussion groups about Islam on popular messaging apps. Within a week, more than 1,000 groups had formed, spreading an unprecedented spirit of learning. The State Communication and Information Center immediately issued an appeal to the media not to report on this phenomenon excessively. Several news portals that had previously published stories of converts and the spiritual atmosphere around the tomb suddenly deleted their content without explanation. However, the news could not be silenced. Abdullah, a young Muslim volunteer who distributed mushafs and explained Islam to visitors, began to come under pressure. He was summoned by security forces for questioning. "I only answered their questions," Abdullah said in an online interview that went viral. "I never forced anyone to convert to Islam. They were just curious, and Islam answered their spiritual needs." The video was watched millions of times. Abdullah's calm face and soft-spoken words only served to fuel the curiosity of many. Meanwhile, behind the walls of power, a chill was growing. Some influential figures dismissed the phenomenon as a cultural anomaly that could shake the state's ideology. But others quietly acknowledged that this was a purely spiritual phenomenon born of a deep longing for truth. One senior official whose identity was kept secret said in a leak, "We cannot stop people from feeling the touch. We can close websites, censor news, but how can we stop the light from entering their hearts?" Amid mounting pressure, the tomb of Prophet Zulk was temporarily closed for conservation and research purposes. Police lines were put up and visitors were barred from approaching. But that only sparked a wave of silent protests. Hundreds of people gathered in silence, carrying flowers and handwritten signs, "We just want to know the truth." They did not shout. They did not carry political banners. But their tears and sincerity were enough to shake the hearts of anyone who witnessed them. Meanwhile, Li Mei, who had officially converted to Islam, secretly began teaching her closest friends about what she had learned from the Quran. Wang Jun, a businessman who is now studying Islam in depth, began to translate Islamic literature into Mandarin so that the wider community could read it directly without intermediaries. In the middle of the crowd, Imam Abdul Hadi, an imam of Hui descent from the Ningxia region, stood with his eyes held back. "My brothers," he said in a trembling voice, "what you feel is not just a momentary emotion. This is a call of nature, a call of the heart from the Lord who created the heavens and the earth." Then, one by one, they raised their right hands, repeating 2 simple but shocking sentences, "Ashhadu allahu, I reflect that there is no God but Allah, and I reflect that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah." Weeping broke out. Some prostrated themselves together. Others hugged fellow new converts without even knowing each other. On that day, more than 3,000 people publicly recited the Shahada, the largest mass conversion in China's modern history. News of the event spread quickly. Videos and photos of the event broke censorship barriers and were reposted by the Muslim diaspora around the world. The hashtags #LightFromFigureTowel and #ChinaConvertsToIslam became international trending topics. Western media outlets began to cover it. CNN called it a spiritual awakening that shocked the world. Al Jazeera aired a special documentary titled From the Wall to the Street. Even world Muslim leaders, including scholars from Al-Azhar and Mecca, sent messages of support and prayers for the new brothers in the Bamboo Curtain country. The Chinese government, which initially tried to suppress this issue, finally took a different stance. Seeing that this wave could no longer be contained, they began to open up dialogue with local Islamic figures. Several regional leaders allowed Islamic study centers and Quran interpretation classes to be open to the public. Wang Jun, now known as Wad Jun, built a small mosque and a Dawah center with his own funds. Lim, who changed her name to Maryam, opened a Quran learning community for students. The wall that once divided and held her back now became a symbol of open hearts. From what I thought, a new light was born. The dawn has sung a song from the east, and the world, which had always viewed China as an economic and military power, now saw a new side, a country that was slowly rising in the light of monotheism. This is the end of our video. If you enjoy Islamic content like this, don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next video.